"Are you even listening to me, old man?" The voice, sharp and laced with condescending impatience, cut through the quiet afternoon air. Elias Vance, 87 years old, didn't turn. His hand, weathered and knotted with age, continued its slow circular motion, polishing a small tarnished brass plaque riveted to the olive-drab steel of the old tank. The scent of metal polish and motor oil hung heavy in the air of his expansive workshop garage. Its wide door opened to the suburban street. The speaker was a woman in a crisp beige town inspector's uniform, a clipboard held against her chest like a shield. Her name was Diane Albright, and she had the self-assured posture of someone who had never been told no. "I said, this vehicle is in violation of at least a dozen municipal codes. It's an unregistered, non-operational piece of military hardware parked in a residential zone. It's an eyesore and a public nuisance." Elias finished his polishing and finally straightened up, his back protesting with a low groan. He was a tall man, stooped by time but not broken. His eyes, a pale but startlingly clear blue, met hers. He didn't look angry or intimidated. He just looked tired. "She's not a nuisance," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "She's a project. It's a tank," Albright snapped back, her professional veneer cracking. "A weapon of war. It doesn't belong here." She took a step closer, pointing a manicured finger at the massive machine that filled most of the three-car garage and spilled out onto the driveway. The M4 Sherman tank was a relic, its paint faded, its tracks caked with the dirt of decades, but Elias was slowly, painstakingly bringing it back to life. Parts were neatly organized on shelves, tools hung in perfect order on the walls. This was not a junkyard, it was a sanctuary. "I'm giving you a formal citation," Albright declared, tearing a sheet from her clipboard. "You have 48 hours to have this thing removed from the premises. If you fail to comply, the town will have it impounded and scrapped, and you will be billed for the expense." She thrust the paper at him. Elias simply looked at it, making no move to take it. His quiet defiance seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. A few neighbors had started to wander out of their homes, drawn by the official vehicle and Albright's raised voice. They stood on their lawns, arms crossed, whispering to each other. "Are you refusing to accept the citation?" Albright's voice rose an octave. "That's another violation. I can have the police down here in 5 minutes." "That won't be necessary," Elias said calmly. He reached into the pocket of his oil-stained coveralls and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He didn't open it to show an ID, he just held it. His gaze drifted from Albright to the tank, a flicker of a distant memory in his eyes. He wasn't just restoring a machine, he was keeping a promise. Albright saw his lack of immediate compliance as stubbornness, the foolish pride of a senior citizen who couldn't accept that the world had moved on. She pulled out her own phone, her thumb hovering over the number for the local police department. "Last chance, sir. Are you going to cooperate?" The small crowd was growing. A car slowed as it passed, the driver rubbernecking at the sight of the massive green tank. Elias could feel the weight of their stares. They saw a crazy old man and a piece of junk. They didn't see the history. They didn't hear the echoes of the past that lived within the cold steel. Albright made the call. "Yes, this is Inspector Albright. I'm at 124 Chestnut Drive. I have a non-compliant individual refusing a town citation. The situation involves a piece of heavy, unlicensed machinery. Yes, it looks like a tank. No, I'm not joking." Within minutes, a local police cruiser pulled up, its lights flashing silently. A young officer, brimming with the kind of confidence that comes from being 6 months out of the academy, stepped out. He adjusted his belt and sauntered up the driveway, a smirk already playing on his lips. "What's the problem here, Diane?" he asked, ignoring Elias completely. "This gentleman," Albright said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "refuses to understand that he can't keep a military tank in his garage. He won't accept the citation for its removal." The officer turned to Elias, his smirk widening. "All right, Pops, let's not make this difficult. Just take the ticket, and we can all get on with our day. You can't just have this." He gestured vaguely at the Sherman, sitting around. Elias's gaze fell again to the small brass plaque he had been polishing. It was old and dented, the engraved letters worn smooth by time and countless touches. To the officer and to Albright, it was just another piece of scrap on a larger pile. They couldn't read the faded inscription. But Elias didn't need to. He knew it by heart. The smell of rust and oil in the garage suddenly faded, replaced by the sharp metallic tang of cordite and frozen mud. The quiet suburban afternoon dissolved into the deafening roar of a 75mm cannon firing, the percussive blast echoing in the cramped cold steel of the turret. For a split second, he wasn't an old man in a garage. He was a 20-year-old sergeant, his hands gripping the controls, the tank lurching through the snow-blasted Ardennes forest. He saw the face of his gunner, a kid from Ohio named Bobby, who they all called Lucky. Bobby grinned at him, his face smudged with grease, and pointed at the identical brass plaque riveted inside the hatch. "She'll see us through, Sarge," Bobby had yelled over the engine's scream. "Lucy's a lucky gal." The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Elias standing silently in the sun, the weight of 70 years settling back onto his shoulders. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, a sleek black sedan pulled up behind the police cruiser. A man in a tailored suit stepped out. He was Robert Henderson, the town manager, a man who saw every situation as a potential political problem or opportunity. Albright's face lit up. "Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming," she said, her voice suddenly full of deference. Henderson strode onto the property, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He surveyed the scene with a practiced air of authority. The tank, the old man, the gathering crowd. He saw a quick and easy win. "Albright, what's the issue?" "Mr. Vance here is refusing to comply with town ordinances," she explained. "The vehicle is a clear violation. I've cited him and he refuses to accept it." Henderson fixed his gaze on Elias, a dismissive, patronizing smile on his face. "Sir," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "I'm sure you're very proud of your hobby, but we have rules in this town. Rules that ensure our community remains safe, orderly, and aesthetically pleasing. A tank in a driveway, I'm sure you can understand, doesn't fit that vision." He sided with Albright without a moment's hesitation, his presence validating her aggression. "Now the officer is here, and we can resolve this one of two ways. You can cooperate, and we can help you find a proper scrapyard, or we can escalate this. I assure you, you don't want that." The chance for a quiet resolution had evaporated. Official power was now fully aligned against him. Elias felt a profound sense of isolation as he looked at the faces in the crowd. He saw judgment, annoyance, and even a little fear. His project, his memorial, was being publicly condemned, but not everyone in the crowd saw a nuisance. Standing at the edge of the property, partially obscured by a large oak tree, was a teenager named Leo. He wasn't a neighbor, he was just cutting through the neighborhood on his way home from school. His grandfather was a Vietnam vet, a man who had taught Leo to recognize the quiet dignity and unspoken pain that many veterans carried. He saw the way the old man stood, not with defiance but with a deep, unshakable resolve. He saw the condescension from the officials and the mockery from the crowd, and it made him angry. Leo had heard his grandfather's stories about men who were forgotten, about promises that were broken. He pulled out his phone, but he didn't hit record. He scrolled through his contacts to a number his grandfather had given him years ago, for emergencies. "You never know when a brother might need help," his grandfather had said. It was the direct line for the Regional Veterans Affairs Liaison Office, which had a connection to the nearby military base, Fort Hamilton. He pressed the call button, turning his back to the scene for a bit of privacy. A calm, professional voice answered. "Veteran Support. How can I help you?" Leo spoke quickly, his voice low but urgent. "Hi, my name is Leo. I'm in Northwood, on Chestnut Drive. There's a situation here. The town is trying to impound an old tank that a veteran has been restoring. They're threatening to arrest him. He looks to be in his 80s. His name, hold on." Leo craned his neck and saw the name stitched above the pocket of the man's coveralls. "His name is Elias Vance." He described the tank as best he could. "It looks like a Sherman tank from World War II. He relayed the threats from the town manager and the inspector. "They're treating him like he's a criminal. It just feels wrong." The person on the other end of the line was silent for a moment, and Leo could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. Then, the voice came back, suddenly sharp with a new intensity. "Did you say Elias Vance, with an M4 Sherman tank?" The scene cut away to a sterile, quiet office at Fort Hamilton. Major Davis held the phone to his ear, his posture going from relaxed to ramrod straight. "Spell the last name for me, son," he commanded. Leo did. "Vance." "Stay on the line," Davis ordered. He put the call on hold and stood up so fast his office chair shot back and hit the wall. He strode out of his office and down the polished hallway, not even bothering to knock on the heavy oak door at the end. He burst into the office of General Marcus Thorne, a 4-star general who was in a meeting with 2 colonels. Thorne looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance at the interruption. "Major, this had better be important." "Sir, I apologize for the intrusion," Davis said, his voice tight with urgency. "We just got a call from a civilian in Northwood, a town dispute. They're attempting to impound a privately owned M4 A3E8 Sherman." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "A Sherman? That's unusual, but is it a matter for—" "Sir," Davis cut him off, a breach of protocol that made the other colonel stiffen. "The owner's name is Elias Vance. The air in the room went still. The annoyance on General Thorne's face vanished, replaced by a look of utter, profound shock. He slowly turned his head to look at a framed black-and-white photo on his credenza. It showed a group of young, grinning soldiers posing on a Sherman tank. Thorne's eyes locked onto the face of the young sergeant standing proudly in the center. "Elias Vance," the general whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked back at Davis, his eyes blazing with a fire that hadn't been there a moment before. "Where is he?" "Chestnut Drive in Northwood, sir. The local authorities are on site. They're threatening to arrest him." Thorne stood, his 6'3" frame seeming to fill the entire room. "Get me a helicopter," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Scramble the honor guard. Get a convoy on the road. I want to be there in 15 minutes. Back on Chestnut Drive, the situation had deteriorated. Emboldened by Henderson's official backing, several neighbors now felt confident enough to join the fray. It's about time something was done about that monstrosity. One man shouted from his porch. "It's been leaking oil on his driveway for months. My kids are scared of it," a woman added, her voice shrill. "What if he gets it running? What then?" The crowd, which had started as merely curious, was now becoming a small, self-righteous mob. They filmed with their phones, their commentary painting Elias as a reckless and stubborn old man who was putting the neighborhood at risk. His reputation, carefully built over 60 years of living in that house, was being dismantled in minutes. Henderson, seeing the tide of public opinion turning in his favor, decided it was time to end it. He puffed out his chest and took a step toward Elias, his face a mask of condescending pity. "Sir, I'm afraid we're past the point of discussion." He nodded to the young police officer. "Officer, this man is clearly a danger to himself and others. He's delusional. I want you to place him in protective custody. We'll take him for a psychiatric evaluation while my team arranges for the removal of the hazard." It was the ultimate overreach. He wasn't just trying to take Elias's property. He was trying to strip him of his liberty and his sanity. The officer, looking hesitant for the first time, took a reluctant step forward, his hand moving toward his handcuffs. Elias stood his ground, his pale blue eyes fixed on the town manager. He said nothing, his silence a more powerful rebuke than any words could be. It was in that moment of ultimate humiliation that a new sound began to permeate the air. It started as a low, rhythmic thumping, a faint chop 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 that was barely audible over the chatter of the crowd. But it grew louder, rapidly. It wasn't a car engine. It wasn't a siren. Heads began to turn, looking toward the sky. Then another sound joined it. The wail of multiple sirens, but not the familiar yelp of the local police. This was a deeper, more urgent tone. Down the street, a convoy of 3 black, government-plated SUVs came into view, moving at a speed that was anything but respectful of the suburban speed limit. They screeched to a halt, boxing in the police cruiser and Henderson sedan. Doors flew open, and a half-dozen soldiers in immaculate dress uniforms emerged. They moved with a silent, synchronized precision that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. They didn't speak a word. They simply formed a cordon, their presence instantly pushing the gawking crowd back from the driveway, creating a wide, sterile space around Elias and his tank. The thumping from the sky was now a deafening roar. A UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, its olive-drab paint seeming to swallow the afternoon light, descended toward the small park across the street. It hovered for a moment before settling onto the grass, its rotor wash kicking up a hurricane of dust, leaves, and cut grass that sent the crowd scrambling for cover. The entire street had fallen into a stunned, disbelieving silence. The side door of the helicopter slid open. The door of the lead SUV was opened by one of the soldiers. A man in a decorated Army service uniform stepped out. On his shoulders were 4 silver stars. General Marcus Thorne. His uniform was a tapestry of his career, a chest full of ribbons telling stories of conflicts and service around the world. He ignored the police officer, who was now standing frozen, his mouth agape. He ignored Inspector Albright, whose face had gone white with shock. He ignored Town Manager Henderson, who looked as if he was about to be physically ill. The general's eyes found Elias. He strode across the driveway, his polished shoes clicking on the asphalt, his movements crisp and purposeful. He came to a stop exactly 3 feet in front of Elias, his back ramrod straight. In the dead silence of the spellbound street, he raised his right hand in a salute so sharp, so perfect, it seemed to cut the air. "Colonel Vance," the general's voice boomed, filled not with command but with a deep, unwavering reverence. "It is an honor to see you again, sir." Elias, looking at the 4-star general, slowly, almost tiredly, raised his own hand and returned the salute. General Thorne dropped his hand and his stern expression softened. He gestured to the tank. "I see you're still taking care of Lucky Lucy." He then turned, his gaze sweeping over the dumbfounded officials and the stunned crowd. His voice dropped the reverence and took on the cold, hard edge of command. "For those of you who are unaware," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the street, "you are standing in the presence of Colonel Elias Vance, a recipient of the Medal of Honor." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. During the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944, then Sergeant Vance and his crew held a critical crossroads against an entire German panzer column for 6 hours, alone, in this very tank. He slapped his hand against the Sherman's steel hull, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. He and his crew are credited with saving the lives of over 200 men of the 101st Airborne. This tank is not a nuisance. It is a designated National Historic Artifact, and it is under the personal protection of the United States Army. None of you, he locked eyes with Henderson, will be touching it, and none of you will be touching him. The crowd's shame was palpable. People who had been yelling moments before now lowered their heads, unable to meet the general's furious gaze. The young police officer looked horrified, slowly backing away. Henderson's face was the color of ash, but Diane Albright, her career and authority crumbling before her very eyes, refused to break. Fueled by a potent cocktail of indignation and disbelief, she took a staggering step forward. "I don't care who he is," she screeched, her voice cracking. "He is in violation of Municipal Code 14B. This is my jurisdiction, and that thing is being moved." A new wave of shock washed over the crowd. The sheer audacity of her defiance in the face of a 4-star general was breathtaking. General Thorne didn't even deign to look at her. He turned to one of his aides, a young captain holding a satellite phone. "Captain, get the Secretary of the Army on the line, then get me the governor's office." He then slowly, deliberately, turned his head just enough to fix Albright with a stare that could freeze fire. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "your jurisdiction ends where my gratitude begins. Stand down." He turned back to Elias, his expression softening once more. Elias, who had remained a pillar of calm throughout the entire ordeal, finally spoke. He looked past the general to Albright, his pale blue eyes holding not anger but a profound and weary sadness. He reached out and gently touched the small dented brass plaque on the side of the tank. "It was never about the codes," he said, his gravelly voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "This tank, this work, it isn't for me. It's for them." He tapped the plaque. "It's for the boys who didn't come home. It's for my gunner, Bobby. We called him Lucky, but his luck ran out in Belgium. He never got to see his 20th birthday. Some things are more important than rules." The general's aide, phone pressed to his ear, nodded to his boss. He then walked over to the pale and trembling town manager, Robert Henderson. The aide spoke in a low, dispassionate voice that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "Sir, I've just spoken with the mayor's office. They were patched in with the governor. They send their deepest apologies to Colonel Vance. They also asked me to inform you and Miss Albright that your services are no longer required by the town of Northwood. Effective immediately." A week later, the change on Chestnut Drive was remarkable. Elias's Sherman tank, now gleaming with a fresh coat of olive drab paint, rested on a newly poured concrete plinth at the edge of his property. Next to it stood a professionally made bronze sign, installed by the Army's Historical Division. It detailed the history of the M4A3E8 Sherman, Lucky Lucy, and told the story of Colonel Elias Vance and his crew's incredible bravery. The former eyesore had become a revered local landmark, a permanent monument to a hero who lived quietly among them. If you believe in honoring the quiet heroes who walk among us, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you support our veterans, subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of courage and vindication.